Alfred, Laura, lovely to talk to you both, especially in this like the context of AFA. For those joining in, I'm sorry that we're kind of appearing as ghosts, but I mean, I'm looking forward to this conversation. So I think what will be really nice is maybe if we just started with Alfred and Laura, maybe if you could just take us into who you are and what your practice is about a little bit, and then we can maybe jump into a deeper conversation. Starting with Alfred.
Hello. So to everyone who's listening in, I'm Alfred Marasigan. I'm a Manila-based Filipino visual artist, and I work mostly with live streaming, looking at issues of time and things that are tied and related to that subject.
Mm-hmm.
Stories, identity, food,
Mm-hmm.
etc.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Laura?
My name is Laura Sofía Pérez. I'm a New
Mm-hmm.
York-based Puerto Rican artist. I work mainly
Mm-hmm.
in video installation, and I draw from different subjects such as like feminist avant-garde cinema, Caribbean
Mm-hmm.
post-colonial theory,
Mm-hmm.
phenomenological philosophy, and now more recently with
Mm-hmm.
this project, drawing upon myth and ancestral knowledge, specifically from Puerto Rico and adjacent area.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, that's really fantastic. So, I mean, I'm just wondering, since this is the idea of this is somewhat to be a studio visit, I'm just wondering maybe what could be really great as a kind of avenue, as a first avenue into everyone's practice is maybe if you guys wanted to talk a little bit about the project that you guys came to AFA with, and then maybe that could be an avenue through which we kind of continue the conversation. Because I mean, I think for me, one of the things that I'm really excited about, which is also why you guys are also quote unquote paired together, as you know, whatever that means, is that I think that there's so many of these kind of intersections in terms of what you guys are thinking about, also from the geographies from which we are speaking. So I'd love to get into that a little bit. But maybe Laura, if you wanted to kind of tell us a little bit more about sort of the projects you came to AFA with, and sort of the ways where it comes from, and the ways that you're seeing it now develop as well.
Sure. The project that I'm working on right now is loosely titled "How to Love a Place So the Children Will Love Their Land," and it's been kind of like a rediscovery of my own indigenous heritage. It comes kind of from a discomfort of knowing that there is so much history from the place where I'm from that I don't know about, that hasn't been taught to us, and then just kind of also meeting a generation or my generation of artists who are very curious and actively seeking this knowledge of traditions, indigenous traditions specifically. And yeah, just I think just seeing all these contrasts between just history books and then kind of meeting more anthropologists who've been doing more research on these subjects, and seeing these kind of like clashes, right? Kind of motivated me to interview different people. So I have interviews. The two main people that I'm interviewing, one is indigenous identifying woman, and the other person who just passed away, Esteban Valdez. He was an artist, a poet, an archaeologist, and he was such a informative person in this process, and it was very interesting to kind of speak about cultural identity, to speak about indigenous cosmovision and the nature culture binary, the way in which language has been manipulated to erase indigenous people, to erase our history, and those are kind of subjects that I've been working with. At the same time, I've been just going for the past year or so, been shooting around the island, been going to different natural, just shooting natural landscapes, exploring caves, meeting people who are kind of engaging in ancestral practices, whether that's, you know, clay or pottery making and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I
Are
think
you working with Jorge Gonzalez?
Jorge Gonzalez has been a wonderful friend and aid throughout this process,
Right.
actually.
Uh-huh.
One of the inspirations was some of the like research material that he had at the Whitney a few years
Right.
ago, and I reached out to
Yeah.
him, and he's been with me through a lot of this process, actually. And
Yeah,
I owe
because
a
when you were
lot
talking about,
of it to him.
yeah, I mean, I think the way, because what you were talking about, it seemed very, very, very attuned with the conversations I've been lucky to have with him. I think that
Yeah.
also, I mean, this entire question of land and soil, which I think like really, it was something that I find the way that he explores it really beautiful. So yeah, I mean, of course, sorry, go ahead. I
He's
didn't want to
actually in a
interrupt
lot
you.
of the videos, so eventually you will see him
Oh,
there.
really?
Because there were some excursions and things like that that were actually led by him, or we would do together.
Hmm. Do you want to
Um,
talk a bit more specifically about sorry, go on, go on.
oh, I guess what I was going to say, that after the
Mm-hmm.
AfA meetings, after that weekend, I started
Mm-hmm.
seeing. First, it was kind of like this pairing of this interview with these images,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that now I'm kind of seeing it more as a structure of a story bank, where I have
Right.
all these different kind of stories and perspectives, and people
Mm-hmm.
can kind of browse through these short videos on specific themes, whether it's, you know, myth or identity or
Right.
phenotype. There's a bunch of different themes that
Mm-hmm.
that that we've
Yeah.
discussed.
Yeah, I mean that's really fascinating. I was just gonna say, like, do you want to like take us through a little bit about what the particular the films etc. are, so that we can kind of also have a sense of sort of the way that you've been approaching them and what the material that you've been working with is as well.
Sure. It's been mostly. Do you mean like present a visual of it, or just kind of talk about it?
Um, either way, I think it would be great for you to for you to talk about it as
Mhm.
well as if you wanted to present some visuals too.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's been interesting. A lot of it, like I said, is mostly the natural landscapes of the island, especially
Mm-hmm.
the interior of the island. There's a big focus on caves
Mm-hmm.
and water, because I think those are
Mm-hmm.
two things that are very important to me. Like water is one of the. I think it symbolizes the how advanced the indigenous people that came through the island were, and
Mm-hmm.
they're kind of like exchanges
Mm-hmm.
and systems that they had developed through water.
Right.
So it kind of started mostly. It's mainly natural landscapes, fauna, flora. And then I've also come across some found images of natural landscapes, which have been kind of
Mm-hmm.
interesting to see these landscapes through somebody else's vision.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also some iPhone footage that at the beginning I was very precious about my images, but now I've been kind of just um, trying to show a little bit of this kind of process of wanting to find out, and like I mentioned, having a generation of artists that's also going through that process. So there's a
Right.
lot of iPhone footage, like very raw iPhone footage of me with friends or like fellow artists, just kind of
Mm-hmm.
talking, and you overhear conversations and things like that. So that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of integrated into the interviews, which are more formally recorded.
Right, right, right. And then so like because I want to pull I want to pull Alfred into this as well because I think that a lot of the things that Laura just talked about, especially regards to this question of land indigeneity, come up a lot in the project that you sort of brought to AfA, which is Omehan. And
Yeah.
of course, like it's a project that I've also like very very that I love a lot. They're just wondering if you wanted to take us through it a little bit and also talk a little bit about sort of the different trajectories into which it's now turning, especially sort of in the light of sort of the current pandemic, where a lot of what was originally planned with the Lumat students sort of had to take a different form.
Yeah, I think for the longest time, even during the AFA workshops, one of the things that I kind of struggled with and are interested in is how to keep telling the story of Omehen, which is the Manobo Talaingod term for harvest. Because in a nutshell, because the story of the project is either very short or very long. So
can you give us a middle length?
Okay, the shortest way of saying it is just basically it's a collaborative vegetable garden in a campus. So that's just it. I'm from my point of view as a visual artist and educator. It is in a school, and we wanted to make it a class, but also an art project, but also a vegetable garden. So something hands-on, something creative, but also something that engages the community. So it's just a vegetable garden, but in the larger scheme of things, it kind of touches on so many things about like land use and food security and cosmology, indigenous knowledge, pedagogy, narration. So to me, it kind of just that's what keeps me coming back to the project, is the way that it is unresolved, but also very dynamic every time, because it's very simple. They're just vegetables, but if you dissect all of it, it's all they have.
If you cut up the vegetables.
Yeah, it's just that so much. It has so much to say, like botanical time and like even so occupying land. So there's it has a lot of stories within it. So I focus mostly on the garden itself.
Right, yeah. And so, I mean, I think like the last bit which you just talked about in terms of the ways in which sort of these different engagements with landscape bring up so much, especially when we're talking about sort of I mean, again, I hesitate to use this word, and it's not a word that I find a lot of comfort in, the post-colonial setting, because we're talking about two contexts, one of which is actively under colonization, and the other one is being sold to a new colonial power as we speak. And I think it's interesting that when I use those descriptions, we're not sure which one is which, right? But both are territories which bear this kind of this long history of U.S. colonialism, and this is something that I felt was super central to both of your works. And I'm just wondering if, Laura, if you wanted to kind of respond to the ways in which occupation and its resistances kind of feeds into what you're trying to do, and thinking a little bit more about the trajectory with which your work kind of draws within these discourses, because I know it's something that you're extremely invested in as well.
Yes. For this project specifically, I think it was more of the way kind of our education system has shifted, or I mean, during the time that I was in school, it wasn't really a shift. It was just a very kind of surface level education about indigeneity, such as, you know, as simple as, you know, there was one group of indigenous people that came through here, and then they were wiped out, and that's it. And we have some African ancestry, but nobody cares, and we really just relate to our Spanish ancestry, and that's it. And and then there's that complex that then I think is more visible now with the U.S. Puerto Rico relationships. I think it becomes just more apparent now with people who are, for lack of a better term, like pro statehood, or kind of don't really know much about their culture because they've always grown up in this process of assimilation. A lot of the education process from when I was younger was a process of assimilating to the United States. So a lot of our traditions and culture just kind of get lost in the midst. And that was kind of my drive. I think that trying to communicate with people who actually can trace back and say, you know what, no, I identify as an indigenous person. My family has lived here for years, and all we've known is the land, and all we've known is, you know, to cultivate, and that's kind of like the seed of what this movement of indigenous identifying people, that where that comes from is the fact that these are people who've always worked the land. And then just kind of having these interactions, I think, is kind of a way for me to create some sort of, not only educate myself, but also create some sort of resistance towards towards this, and really embrace the richness of that culture.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I feel like, again, just pulling Alfred into this, I feel like, you know, what you just mentioned in terms of the way that the question of pedagogy always intersects with what you're doing. I feel like there's a kind of a very strong, there's a very, very strong sort of linkage with Laura's also thinking about. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more to how, not just in Omehan, but definitely in Omehan, one can see it very clearly. But if you could speak a little bit more to how your work as an educator has always been in intersection with what you're doing as an artist, but also as a kind of a cultural practitioner at large, and the ways in which that in itself has always been a space of resistance.
I think for me, the most concrete like aspect of my practice where this kind of intersects with it's the storytelling aspect, because whenever I choose to say something or portray something in this way, I kind of make a decision or a stand that this is how I want it to be seen, and this is how the people that I'm speaking to. And in Omehen, somehow not really the funniest, but like the most not really tense as well, but like I'm constantly trying to think whether or not I want to digest or envelop the indigenous knowledge that is being offered to us, because if that translates into something textual or academic, it kind of loses the power that it actually has. But I kind of know that it is also, people also need to keep hearing the story, because otherwise other ideas, not like specifically any other ideas, but many other stories could cloud it. So there's that, and also that the land is in a Jesuit campus, so somehow there's that like history of like Christianity, and then but these are the people who never who didn't claim to be Christian at all, so somehow there's that like tension in the land itself that is being occupied. So even in when you say like cosmology or like the ritual, because I think for me one of the most confronting things is the ritual that was conducted, and it kind of reflected how they studied agriculture, because it's usually theoretical, but then there is this practice that isn't theoretical, but it's significant to the community. So I find those
could you describe that a little bit?
So when we were clearing the land, the Bakwit schools who moved from the southern Philippines to here usually ask permission, I think, for to clear the land and to be guided by the activity that we will conduct. And I like that there is an acknowledgement that you're not like humans aren't like intervening in the space, but are like asking for like, maybe, or please help us, because when you grow plants, it's not like I made the plant grow. Like there has to be the seed, there has to be the weather. So we brought in a native chicken, and because it is a class, there are also like students from my university and their own students from the Bakwit schools, and then they asked they conducted the ritual, and then killed the chicken halfway, and then the chicken has to kind of like flail around, and then that's kind of the blessing. I don't know if I'm too Catholic to say, but like it's the blessing or the enchantment probably of the land, and the blood of the chicken is also spread around the tools so that we will not get hurt when we clear the land. So those things you won't find them in books. So to me, it's very valuable, but I'm also careful in like relaying it, because it could be mistranslated. So so the language and the textual and visual language kind of are the decisions that I have to make in my practice that affects how I participate in such conversation.
Yeah, I think that this point that you raise is something that I think is very, very significant, especially especially when we're talking about ways of, I mean, these forms of collaboration with indigenous communities and the ways in which we ourselves sort of relate to those practices, etc. And I'm wondering, Laura, if you want, because you talked a little bit about sort of, you know, these questions of framing indigeneity within your own context, and I was just wondering if you wanted to kind of respond to what Alfred just mentioned in terms of the ways in which the ways in which fundamentally the act of working with certain forms of knowledge fundamentally changes them, because we are coming to them from this kind of already colonized frameworks. And when we turn, you know, this question of the colonizing camera, you know, like when we begin to turn those same devices onto these onto certain narratives, but of course with a totally different politics, what are we doing and how do we negotiate that? And I'm just wondering how you negotiate this in your own practice and in your own thought.
Mm-hmm. I think just kind of, I think having a balance between developing a kind of visual presentation and then also having a genuine relationship with the people that you're working with is really important. Just always maintaining that balance, that consideration, being in touch consistently with the people that that in any way have helped me throughout the process, and just kind of making sure that they're okay with what I'm doing, and just consistently getting feedback. I think that has been really important to me, and I think really helpful in kind of addressing that conflict, which is gonna come up in most everything that we do. And I think that has been one thing. The other thing is, I think that how I've kind of been dealing with it in this project specifically, I think that I've kind of relied a lot on oral history. So I've been doing interviews, but I haven't been using people's likeness for it, because it's important for me to let these stories kind of exist and have people kind of make up their own interpretations in a way too. I don't want to be making something that's completely didactic. I'm getting people's different perspectives and then just kind of cutting and juxtaposing in a way that that they might have conflicting views, but as you see, you can kind of interpret, take what you feel is true. Some things are, you know, merely kind of oral history that's been passed down. Some things are merely based on feeling. Some things are based on more scientific approaches, which I don't think really differs from ancestral knowledge. So it's kind of having that like openness to interpretation, because it is a very tricky, kind of ground to be working in. And I think those are the things that I've kind of implemented in order to deal with that. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that's really great. I mean, it's always very interesting to see the ways in which we're kind of processing, especially when we're within when we're kind of within the thing itself and trying to negotiate and navigate it, and sort of the ways in which sort of our own negotiations with identity also kind of form a key role in the ways in which we're able to produce these responses. And so, I mean, it's just like kind of taking off a little bit from what Laura was talking about earlier, Alfred. I'm just wondering, because for me, like one of the other things that I find super fascinating about what is very central in both your projects is this question of working with cosmologies, and especially in this sort of particular era of anthropocenic climate change, when it is so necessary for us to begin to think about other frameworks. And I'm just wondering, Alfred, if you could maybe begin to respond to this question about, I mean, to look at how you guys are kind of responding to this question in Omehan, and then I'll come to you, Laura, with the same question right after.
I think Omehan, as it kind of is closing now within the campus, but not as an idea.
Yeah.
We actually retitled it in a way to include saying that it is an unfinished and an ongoing strategy of resistance, because the way that I like seeing art's limits, and I think in a cosmological sense, when you collaborate with indigenous people or with nature or with so you don't really subscribe to like a time frame that the art doesn't really end because they can't really like stop vegetables. Like I mean, the vegetables will die, but it will turn back into matter, and so it is. And not only that, but actually, if I could share screen a bit, I'm pretty happy to like report also that they continued planting their own like garden in the new school where they are seeking refuge in. So they just reported it in actually just like across like a different university, which is UP, which is University. Okay. Yeah, and then there's so much that they showed us, like so much harvest. And to me, as much as it's not my project, I'm very happy that there is actually Carl articulated that they were like a little bit inspired to like have their own garden in UP as well. So it's not like a fixed project, but it is something continuing. So there's no like as a cosmology, I don't think it follows something numerical or something fixed, because nature is a cycle. So I think that's the way that the time or calendars or numerical like thinking is defined by collaborating with the Bakwit schools.
That's really beautiful. Thank you so much, Alfred. And so just again, turning to you, Laura, with the same question, just wondering if you wanted to respond to that.
Do you mind repeating
of
the
course,
question?
Yeah, just kind of reframe it as well. I mean, for me, one of the things you mentioned quite strongly towards the beginning of your talk was how you were trying to work with sort of cosmologies and sort of this entire question of re-engaging with nature cultures. And I'm just wondering about if you could tell us a little bit about sort of, because that is a speculative exercise, and I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about sort of the ways in which your practice is engaging with that, and sort of the larger, and within especially the larger context of sort of climate collapse within which we are currently. And how you're kind of negotiating these things intellectually.
Yeah, I think earlier Alfred was talking about a lot of these things that I've been kind of interacting with, and it's coming across these cosmologies of where nature and water are the main thing, and are a living being that coexists with you, and kind of being able to begin seeing nature as that, and not as something that we extract from consistently. Some of the things that Alfred was saying about the rituals kind of made me think about some of the things that are discussed in the video that I'm working about as well, in like Central America and the Caribbean indigenous peoples, how they would implement this thing called sympathetic magic, and just kind of mimic or kind of try to do something that that reflects what they want nature to give them. So if I want rain, I'm gonna pour a little water on this bowl that I made, or something like that. And I think that I'm kind of, I don't know that I've thought about a huge impact in terms of the idea of climate change. I haven't particularly been working the land or things like that, but I am very interested in having these conversations and making people tune into our natural resources, and maybe making people tune into the importance of seeing nature, kind of clashing that kind of like nature and culture binary, and having people understand that we are one with it, and that we depend on it, and it depends on us.
Yeah, no, that's really great. Just to kind of like bring this towards a wrapping up mode, I'm wondering if both of you would like to ask each other one question to kind of to sum up this conversation. So maybe Alfred, I'll turn to you first to ask Laura a question.
We had a very long conversation.
On the spot. Yeah, we actually already talked a bit, and I think we're pretty excited to find commonalities in our in our
Right.
work when we were talking outside of this. So, and also in the upcoming like open studio project. So are you looking forward to anything, Laura, in regards to the project or regards to the open studios?
I think I'm looking forward to seeing some of your older work. We've talked a lot about this project because, and actually have found a lot of really common things. I actually have some notes from, we spoke for over an hour the other day. And there were a lot of questions that came up in terms of like working with marginalized groups, or kind of these ideas of like, one of the things that Alfred brought up was like to reconcile with our own like colonizer culture. And what else? Yeah, the idea of botanical time is something that came up. So I'm really excited to see more like see these things that we talked about, how they kind of translate through images, and seeing if those parallels that come up in conversation are actually maybe translated through the visual, or our sketchbooks, or whatever it is that we will be posting. So
that's great.
I'll do my best. I'll do my best. It's nice. Up to a surprise. So.
Yeah. And I think if I were to ask something, I think like one of the things that we ended our conversation on the other day was like the idea of serendipity in like your own process of this project. I thought it could be interesting if you described that or talked about that a little bit. I think we kind of like brushed over it.
Honestly, I showed the harvest, because like of all the days that we're gonna hold like the interview, it seemed like a punctuation or something that they should send us like a lot of pictures of like their harvest today. So to me, it's something that I enjoy in the way that I work. That as messy as it is presentation wise, there is a feeling that things fall in place, because I think that like self-evidence is something that I'm really like trying to catch or pursue in my project. So I hope that serendipity and chance plays a part in the way that that I get to convey my involvement in the collaboration, because I think it's something worth adapting.
And I think that also ties into this idea of these projects being ongoing, because I think that you're kind of feeding that not cycle, but more of a progression, and the more you feed it, the more of a positive outcome hopefully we begin to see.
Yeah, because I think I'm all, like we keep within my friends and like peers, we keep thinking about how in Southeast Asia somehow there's that feeling of like allowing yourself to like face the typhoon or face the volcano or face the. So I guess it's like a less of a let's not control too much and kind of like just place ourselves in the situation and see how it plays out. So I try to do that a lot in my work, but also find things along the way and learn, because I think like the limits of art is something that sometimes we don't always acknowledge, that like sometimes the project isn't really successful, but like maybe that there's something valuable in things that aren't expected, that aren't planned, because the best is still unknown always.
Perfect. And I think that's a really, really great note to end it on. I mean, it's a little bit of a funny throwback to the best is yet to come, which we heard quite recently. But those unfortunate associations aside, I'm really, really excited to see what you guys cook up together, and I'm really, really happy to see that this has kind of been, as you guys said, a kind of ongoing conversation. I'm really, really looking forward to seeing how that ongoing conversation unfolds. So thank you, Alfred, Laura, thank you so much. And thank you, Chrysola, for helping us technically through this. So we'll rejoin for a second on video and say goodbye. Have a lovely rest of the day and evening, and see you all on Instagram soon.
See you. Thank you so much for your time. Chrysola,
thank you so much.
So you're muted.